Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you've heard of this. They're going to call it the Kingdom Tower. It is going to be 1 kilometer high, 3,000 feet straight up. That's crazy, isn't it? Think about that. But at the same time, it was like 2 weeks ago in the news, I was happy to see a story about these little tiny houses. Have you seen that? A lot of you nodding your heads. It's like for people who don't want to live in the overstuffed suburban castle, we'll call it, right? Too much stuff, and they want to, downsize, they want to be energy efficient, they want to live simply, so they got the tiny house. It's a countercultural movement, isn't it? See this tension? There's big and small going on. To be a Christian, though, calls us in some ways, in different ways, to be countercultural and to take countercultural stances. And so these parables, I want us to see how they zoom in on this tension of big and small. Notice, too, that how these parables talk about the growth of God's kingdom doesn't happen in a big, showy, spectacular, worldly way at all, but through small things, very small, like a tiny mustard seed. And yet, what is provided is everything that we need for life, right? Nourishment, food, shelter, the things that we really need and can't get away, can't live without, are provided in God's kingdom, in His working there. I think that this is a marvelous message for Maple Grove Lutheran Church. That what we do as the Lord's people in mission is no small potatoes. I think we planted some potatoes, some sweet potatoes over there. What we're doing is no small potatoes. But that's hard to remember without these parables, because that kind of work is overlooked and undervalued by the world. I'm sure we get battered all the time. That's why I want to listen. I'm doing this with you. Listen to the big, small conversation in our culture. And it can discourage us with messages about our smallness. I think the devil's in that too. I really do. In messages that run down what God is doing through us. What God does through little bubbles and seeds, tiny seeds, and every act of love and faith we offer up. I think the devil plants a lie. He's trying to snatch up that seed that we're sowing. The seeds of God's good news, of Christ's love on the cross, of food and nourishment and shelter provided right here through this community of faith. Jesus says God works in small, even tiny ways, and that these will bring about His kingdom, and it's going to be the greatest of all shrubs. Wait a minute. A shrub? It's not going to look like the Kingdom Tower? 3,000 feet high? How about a shrub with at least lights on it? Or some music coming out, Synchronized. The greatest of all shrubs, huh? I got to think about that. God's kingdom comes through something as mundane and plain as a mustard shrub. A shrub that's not even really big as a tree, just big enough to provide shelter for some birds. Not like big birds even, because it doesn't have that big of branches. I remember, being up at Itasca State Park one time and seeing an eagle, and it was perched way up on the top of some huge pine, like a big red pine, That's not the mustard shrub, not big enough for that, but only big enough for some ordinary little birds like sparrows. And we know God has His eye on the sparrows and on the ordinary little birds and finches, and in fact He even loves them, and they're important to God, and they're precious in God's sight. How many of you got to be around Vacation Bible School this week, speaking of little things? Oh my gosh. What a week. It's like I call it the happiest, most fun week of the year at church. And our church was full of little kids and teenagers and adult helpers. It was great. Wednesday, I was hosting all the pastors in our local conference, and VBS was still going on at noon when they all came by. And the kids were filling up the sanctuary, and they were dancing and singing. And the pastor said, "Wow, this is awesome." Because they don't have kids in their churches. They got some seeds to sow. They thought it was awesome, the work we're doing. And I know that some of these teens that came, we had a lot of teens. That in itself was just an awesome thing to see them stepping up as leaders. But, you know, school was just got out, and here they were rolling out of bed real early, and you could see it in their eyes, trying to wake up desperately to get going for VBS, and probably wondering, like, why am I doing this? It was to plant some seeds in those little hearts. And that is no small potatoes. God says, Jesus says, through these parables. And you know what? Our church was full of music. And I think, too, I don't know if this relates, but it's just like, it was so marvelous that I realized God provides a church community for mirth and music in this world. Where else do we get to sing together like that and dance together like that? Mirth and music in our world. We need it, and God preserves that in our church community. And there were people who had kids in that VBS who are hungering for something other than what the bigger, faster, richer, more world gives. They weren't going to find it outside. They were going to find it here, because God gives something personal and authentic and real. His own Son. He gave it in humility. He gave it with a servant heart and with sacrifice, to seek out all those people that are undervalued and overlooked in the world. When conditions are hard or challenging, remember that the only soil that God needs to grow this stuff, to grow His kingdom, to grow miracles, is our faith. That's all that's needed. It's good news, Maple Grove Lutheran. Keep on with your tenacious faith, your exuberant worship and praise, because God is working in you and through you and beyond you to grow His kingdom. And is there anything bigger than that? Amen.